Welcome to those here in person and to those online. Glad that you are with us. This is our final class in our series on biblical economics. I've enjoyed it. I'm not sure if you've enjoyed it, but it's given me a chance to think pretty carefully about the ways in which my faith and my practice diverge. And as I've invited you to think each time, wherever you feel that divergence, wherever you feel that rub, that friction, trust that that's the opportunity for spiritual growth and to lean into it. I would be surprised if our response to those disparities was either to give up on the economy or to give up on Jesus. I think it's far more likely that we sort of lean into that rub and often name the disconnect. But at least if we're aware of it and honest about it, it will help us be faithful as we seek to honor God with all that we have and all that we are. If you're watching on the live stream, we're glad that you're here. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget that if you want to participate in the discussion, to join us in the Zoom webinar, there's a link in the chat on YouTube that will allow you to navigate over to the Zoom webinar so that we can get your questions and your comments. Those of you in person, just raise your hand if you have something to share, and I'll try to remember to repeat for those watching elsewhere what your comment or your question is. A reminder to you in person, but particularly to you online, that next Sunday, Adeline Tyler will be with us. It's her first Sunday, and we'll be having a stage conversation with her. And because of that, there will not be a Zoom webinar. And we anticipate for the next several weeks, at least, that we will not use a Zoom webinar. Instead, we will live stream on YouTube using the equipment and the expertise of Dan Robinson, our media minister. So you will still be able to watch online on the YouTube channel, but the Zoom webinar link will not be active. It will not work. So make sure you join us on YouTube. And we are looking for ways that we can watch for your questions and your comments. But more than anything, you'll at least be able to see the discussion next week as we get to know Adeline Tyler. Well, let's begin today's class, the 4th of July. It was not an accident that I picked taxation for our theme for today. Let's pray together the prayer at the top of the handout. Let me share my screen so that those watching at home can also pray it with us. Hold on a second. Let me zoom in. There we go. All right, so this is actually, I'll confess to you, I took the beginning of a prayer and the end of a prayer, and I left out the middle because it just didn't fit for this format. But what I've compiled together as a prayer for sound government, which is taken from the Book of Common Prayer, let's pray that prayer together. O Lord, our governor, bless the leaders of our land, that we may be a people at peace among ourselves and a blessing to other nations of the earth. Teach our people to rely on your strength and to accept their responsibilities to their fellow citizens, that they may elect trustworthy leaders and make wise decisions for the well-being of our society, that we may serve you faithfully in our generation and honor your holy name. Amen. So today we're talking about taxation. We've looked at a lot of related topics, and taxation is one that I kind of have to stretch a little bit to get scriptural references for, but not as much as you might think. Actually, the Bible has a fair amount to say about paying taxes. It doesn't have as much to say about governments charging taxes, but it does say something about paying taxes. Yet there's a little bit about taxation from the government's perspective. But let's listen to this. And I think by the time we get to the end, there will be a surprise twist, a turn or a rub that I find deeply challenging, and I bet you will find deeply challenging as well. But let's see where we go. Let's start with a passage from Exodus. I'm going to read this passage from Exodus chapter 30. And you'll notice on your handout, and as we get down, that several of the scriptural passages I've taken from other versions because I think they articulate more clearly what the text means, especially when you take it out of context. But this first passage I've taken from the ESV, the English Standard Version. And let me read this passage and let's ask ourselves, what does this tell us about taxation and the way we're supposed to live in relation with each other? Exodus 30. The Lord said to Moses, "When you take the census of the people of Israel, then each shall give a ransom for his life to the Lord when you number them, that there be no plague among them when you number them. Each one who is numbered in the census shall give this: half a shekel, according to the shekel of the sanctuary. The shekel is 20 gerahs. Half a shekel as an offering to the Lord. Everyone who is numbered in the census, from 20 years old and upward, shall give the Lord's offering. The rich shall not give more, and the poor shall not give less than the half shekel when you give the Lord's offering to make atonement for your lives. You shall take the atonement money from the people of Israel and shall give it for the service of the tent of meeting, that it may bring the people of Israel to remembrance before the Lord, so as to make atonement for your lives. Now, the first question, what does this have to do with taxation? Good question, but I'm curious what you think. Like, help me make a connection. Why would I have chosen this passage? What about this sounds like taxation? What about this is different? And what are the connection between this passage and taxes and communal life and bureaucracy that you notice? And what are the ones that you might question or push back on? What's your response to that passage? Remember, if you're watching on the Zoom webinar, to use the Q&A feature so I can get your comments. And if you're watching on YouTube, I hope you'll navigate over to the Zoom webinar so that we can hear from you. All right, what do you think? What do you notice? Yeah, Susie.
Everyone will give half shekel. So, like, it is what it is.
It is what it is. Everyone will give. Everyone will give. Yes.
And I think the other thing that stands out to me is when you come into the tent to give, you're all equal.
Huh. When you come into the tent to give, you're all equal.
So the rich have to pour, the poor have to bless.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting observation that I want to hold back to you, because this is what I think I hear, is that I hear you interpreting that if the poor and the rich are all giving the same amount, asked to give the same amount, then in a sense they're equal as they come into the tent of meeting. The tent of meeting being the place of worship, but also the kind of the locus of the public life, of the common life. And so because of the way the taxes are imposed, then somehow in the eyes of the institution that's imposing them, in this case, the religious community, there's an equality. Yeah, okay, thank you. Jeffrey, did you have something to add? She said it. Yeah, she said it. All right, what else do you notice? What else do you notice? Yeah, Dave.
We're getting it for the service of the tent. So you're getting it sort of do the upkeep for the public. Even though it's not only for atonement, we're really just going to be changing it into part of the government.
Yeah, so Dave points out that it's for what happens in the tent, right? That you will get for the service of the tent. That's what the operation of the tent. And yet, Dave, you also note that there's the language about atonement. So maybe nominally it's about atonement, but practically it's about, you didn't use those words, but practically about the service of the tent. And one might ask, how are those connected? How is the service of the tent and atonement connected? And you might remember last week, or maybe the week before, I can't remember, but we read from a 2nd century Christian text. I think it was the Didache, and we read about the way that Sunday worship is to happen, and it talked about how an offering is to be taken up to meet the needs of the poor in the community. That from the very earliest days of the Christian community, that what we do when we get together is to receive communion and to give alms to support those in need. And I wonder if we went all the way back to this text, which takes place during the time of the Exodus, the wilderness journey, as Israel is being formed as a nation state, and of course, as a sanctuary or tent of meeting is established, we might ask, what's the connection between the worship in the temple, the service in the temple, the atonement, the theology of what happens in the temple, and perhaps how those monies are used, whether it's just for what happens in the temple or what happens out of the temple. Yeah. Anyway, yeah. Thank you. What else do you notice? Yeah, Liz.
I think it's the most interesting part to me is that you give a ransom for your life, and then there's no place among them when you're out.
Okay, I heard the ransom for your life, and then what was the second part? I couldn't hear it.
There's no place among them.
So, yes. So you will give this offering as a ransom for your life, so that there won't be a plague among you. Brackets. If you don't give it, you better watch out. Right? There's something about that. Yeah, and that image of ransom. A priest, Corky Carlisle, some of you might know Corky. He was a stewardship speaker here once, though he became deathly ill and was in the hospital and wasn't able to fulfill his duties. he might have come back, I'm not sure about that, well before my time, but anyway, Corky, who's a friend of mine, he thinks that everybody on their birthday should give an offering to the church. And he says you should give it $1 for every year of your life. And sometimes he portrays this kind of in a silly way. He would say, somebody will say, well, I'm 75 years old, should I really give $75? And the answer is, if you can't give, if you can't give $1 for each year of your life, what's your life worth anyway? And there's that kind of language of ransom for your life. Corky's always trying to figure out how to get people to give more, which is great, which is why he's often a stewardship speaker. But I love that you center on that ransom for your life. There's something about what God has done for us and what we give, this offering, the language is offering, not taxation, but this offering that is both a reflection of our being saved, the ransom, but also a statement of prayer that nothing worse would happen to us, right? And so there's kind of some weird language there. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, we don't use that language in stewardship, thankfully. Yeah. Yeah, what else do you notice? What else? Yeah, Dave.
I have a question about this. In my mind, most of the people are farmers or herdsmen or something like that. And a shekel, I don't know how much shekel it is, it seems like kind of a lot. And I wonder how much the common people really got to participate in the life of the.
Yeah, that's a good question. I don't think it's that much. I think it's very little. I think it's like a copper coin rather than a gold coin or a silver coin. I think it's really pretty ordinary. I do wonder why a regressive tax. Why do rich people not have to give more, and why do poor people have to give the same amount? Maybe it's so little that it makes no sense to say that, right? Kind of like everybody can give $1. Everybody, even the person who has no shelter over his head and doesn't know where his bread's going to come from, can scrape together $1. We might say, or maybe one would ask, at what point is what's being asked so little that it's almost meaningless? And then what's the value of it? Yeah, but I wonder if there's a connection between your question and the concept of census. Like, there's something about the language of census here. Each one who is numbered shall give. I wonder if there's something about having identity and value, like that I'm a constituent part of this community. Sometimes vestries get really anxious when rectors talk to newcomers about giving money to the church, and they say, "Oh, they're new here. We shouldn't ask them to give any money." And the response is, "They're new here. Of course, we should ask them to give money. Don't they want to be a part of what we do?" I mean, it's like when you're in your 20s and 30s and people keep inviting you over to dinner and you say, "What can I bring?" And they say, "Oh, no, nothing." But everybody else who's come has brought something. But, "Oh, you're 25, so we're not going to ask you." Well, what do you think a 25-year-old wants to do? They want to contribute. They want to share. They want to be a part of that. So I wonder. I don't know enough about the economy of that. I don't know enough about the history of the text to know how the text has also been changed. But my sense is that it's very, very little. And I wonder if there's something about everybody gets counted the same. Everybody gets asked to pay the same. And also, the Articles of Confederation didn't work very well because it didn't create strong enough bonds in our governmental structure. And we needed tax was a big controversy in the first few decades of the existence of our republic. And I wonder if this reflects a time when we really weren't asking for much, because this is more like a book club where everybody chips in $5 for whatever gift we're going to give to what's her face when she has a child, right? There's like, I wonder how much of this is about common life and how much of this is just kind of a shelter framework. Yeah. All right, well, let's hold on to this, because actually Chronicles is going to help us interpret Exodus. So let's look down at the next passage from 2 Chronicles chapter 24, and it's a little bit longer, but I think it elucidates for us some of what, at least how God's people interpreted the legend of Exodus. This is from the Common English Bible. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king, and he ruled for 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah. She was from Beersheba. Jehoash did what was right in the Lord's eyes as long as Jehoiada the priest was alive. Jehoiada had him marry 2 wives, and Jehoash fathered sons and daughters. Sometimes later, Jehoash wanted to renovate the Lord's temple. He gathered the priests and the Levites and said, "Go to the cities of Judah and collect the annual tax of silver due from all Israel for the upkeep of God's temple. Do it right away." But the Levites procrastinated. So the king summoned the chief priest Jehoiada and asked him, "Why haven't you required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax imposed by the Lord's servant Moses and the Israelite assembly for the covenant tent?" Now, wicked Athaliah and her followers had broken into God's temple and used all the holy objects of the Lord's temple in their worship of the Baals. So at the king's command, a box was made and placed outside the gate of the Lord's temple. Then a proclamation was issued throughout Judah and Jerusalem, requiring the people to bring to the Lord the tax that God's servant Moses had imposed on Israel in the wilderness. This so pleased all the leaders and all the people that they gladly dropped their money in the box until it was full. Whenever the box was brought by the Levites to the royal accountants, as soon as they saw that a large amount of money was in the box, the royal scribe and the representative of the high priest, I forgot to scroll up, would come, empty the box, and return it to its place. This took place day after day, and a large amount of money was collected. The king and Jehoiada would give it to those in charge of the work on the Lord's temple, who in turn hired masons and carpenters to renovate the Lord's temple, as well as metal workers for the iron and bronze to repair the Lord's temple. The workers labored hard, and the restoration progressed smoothly under their control until they had brought God's temple back to its original state and reinforced it. As soon as they finished, they brought the remaining money to the king and Jehoiada. They used it to make equipment for the Lord's temple, including what was used for the service and the entirely burnt offerings, pans, and other objects made of gold and silver. As long as Jehoiada lived, the entirely burned offerings were regularly offered in the Lord's temple. All right, how does this help us understand it? What do you notice? So what do you notice? What fascinates you about this text? What's interesting to you? Yeah. What interests you? Paula, did you have something? No. What interests you? Yeah.
They were pleased to pay it.
They were pleased to pay it. They were. Yes. Isn't it funny? There's something about, and I don't know what the intention is. I need a rabbinic scholar to help me understand it. But my instinctive reading of this is that there was something unwelcome about the priests and the Levites going out and asking for the tax. And there's something welcome and delightful about bringing your offering to the temple. There's something different about that. There's something about placing the box at the door and saying, when you come, make your offering, that people found really exciting and encouraging. But when someone shows up at your door and says, give me what's due, we don't like that. I think that's true. I think that's generally true still. Yeah. All right. What else do you notice about this text? A lot of money. Yeah, Jim.
Looks like money is going towards burnt offerings instead of helping the poor.
Yes, there's money left over. And what do they do with it? They make sure they have even more implements to worship. Yeah. And Chronicles, the chronicler really wants to talk about priestly worship. That's really important to the chronicler. And so it's kind of like if you asked the chair of the altar guild, the most substantial accomplishment at St. Paul's in the last decade, I would be surprised if it had something to do with the nursery or community meals or that, right? Not because anyway, but that's just sort of the focus. And I think partly that's the chronicler, but you're right. The text does not tell us that they gave the money back, right? Yeah. What else do you notice? What else do you notice? Yeah.
That looks like structure is being imposed on it. And you wonder, is that necessary? And you want to give it like this. They don't want, too much, enough is enough.
Structure is being imposed on the people and they don't like it, right? Enough is enough. Like just finding that right balance. Yes. People like their freedom, right? People like to give cheerfully. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and too much structure or too much, if you overemphasize the mechanics or the bureaucracy, then people lose their confidence in it. They lose their attraction, their ability to participate in it. Yeah, Liz.
So anytime they saw that there was a back up again, was that like, say, okay, there's really not this much money you need to keep getting? Or?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know. You know, whenever, it doesn't happen very often, but whenever there's a service here and we're not passing an offering plate, but we're putting an alms basin out, I will often put extra money in it just to kind of entice people to give, because when it's empty, it's likely to stay empty. But you're right, when it's too full, maybe people won't give. I don't know if the intention is the psychology of that, but I know that psychology is real. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, Susie. Yes, the insertion of the wicked, yeah, the wicked woman. Yeah. I don't know. My best guess is that that sentence, and let me scroll up so those at home can see it, the part in parentheses. My sense is that that sets the stage for why they're going to use the extra money to make new implements, because they all were defiled in unholy service. Yeah. You know, we don't have it anymore, but every once in a while we have to retire vessels from service. You know, ceramic chalices get chipped or cracked, and other things get sort of broken and dented. And you know, y'all know my piety is pretty low, so I tend to just want to throw them away. But people who are more spiritual than I say, oh no, you can't do that. You have to bury them, or you have to burn them, or you have to dispose of them in some sacred way. So somewhere around here, there's buried a bunch of stuff. And one of them, I was told by Susie Freeman, she said that when the church was broken into and someone stole a lot of the implements, there's one silver box that when the police recovered it, they said, you can never use this again. And I said, why not? She goes, yeah, I don't know, but that's what they said, so we didn't use it. We buried it. And I was like, yeah, well, okay. So, and I don't know why, but anyway, but you know, imagine that there's something about what this evil woman did with their evil worship that meant that we can't use that. We can't use that anymore. We had to get rid of it, so we had to start over. So I think it's just setting a foundation for why we're going to spend that money on a new set of silver. Yeah. What else do you notice? Anything else you notice in this? Yeah, Jim.
This is a side thing, but their king is 7 years old, so who is the leader?
That's a good question. Yeah, I don't know who reigned in this. Probably the priest. I mean, in this chapter of Israel's history, right? Kings are often sort of there's like either a prophet or a priest, usually a priest, kind of the right hand person to help sort of administer that. Yeah, probably that. All right, well, let's keep going. Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, Cliff, go ahead. Yeah, I didn't see your hands. Go ahead.
I'm just going to say this thing about emptying the coffers and then returning them.
Yeah. Isn't there an element of mistrust?
That somebody might take what they need without asking.
Maybe. I don't know what's meant by the word box, but I think it's a strong box. I don't think it's just like a plate. Yeah, so I think there's a sense in which, I mean, there might be, or maybe it's because they want to use it, or maybe it's because they want to solicit more donations. I don't know. Maybe there's that element of mistrust. Yeah, I don't know.
We've had examples here of filtering or whatever
Mm-hmm.
from an almost cross.
Yeah.
People just came in and
Yeah. Yep.
they probably needed it more than anybody else. But,
Yeah. Sometimes people take things. Yeah.
we're not just
Yeah. No matter how poor someone was, if they broke into St. Paul's and stole something, I would file a police report. Yeah. That's a whole class. Yep. All right. Pam. Yes.
The Levites were supposed to collect the money, but they didn't do it, so the king called everybody together. And then in verse 9, it says, a proclamation was given requiring people to bring it. And verse 10 says, all the people are pleased with it and start bringing it.
Yes.
Why though?
Yeah.
Everybody pleased.
I don't know, but my guess is that people didn't. Well, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to question it. But my guess is that people didn't want folks to come to their door and ask them for money. They wanted to bring it. I think that's it. I also think there's something about, this is a great passage for stewardship study for vestries and rectors. When vestries say, we need more money in the budget, go get it from them. And the priests procrastinate. And then the vestries say, why didn't you do that? And the answer is, and so maybe instead we should issue a proclamation and say, everybody bring it. Or maybe we should be of the business to go and get it, right? It's not my job to raise money for St. Paul's. It's our job to do ministry at St. Paul's. And a part of that ministry is stewardship. And I'm going to do my part and talk about it. But vestries have a role to play as well. So I don't know. I think the text is given to us this way because the king said to the priest, go get the money. And the priest didn't want to for whatever reason. And there's room for interpretation of that. And then the result of their procrastination and failure, the king calls them to account. And for whatever reason, we are not told, a proclamation is issued, and the proclamation made everybody happy. So there's something about the king telling the priest to go get the money that didn't make people happy, whether that's because the people in their homes didn't want to do it, or because the priests didn't want to do it. I don't know, but that's open for interpretation. Yep. Let's read from 1 Samuel. This is a different take, if you will, on taxation. And this is the first thing that came to my mind when I was getting ready for this class, when I thought about this class. This is when the people have been asking for a king. We want a king, we want a king, we want a king. And God keeps saying, you don't want a king. And so this is the last straw. Samuel told all the words of the Lord to the people who were asking for a king from him. He said, these will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of 50, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest, and to make his implements of war and the equipment of his chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his servants. He will take the tenth of your grain of your vineyards and give it to his officers and to his servants. He will take your male servants and female servants and the best of your young men and your donkeys and put them to his work. He will take the tenth of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And in that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves. But the Lord will not answer you in that day. But the people refused to obey the voice of Samuel. And they said, no, but there shall be a king over us, that we also may be like all the nations, and that our king may judge us and go out before us and fight our battles. And when Samuel had heard all the words of the people, he repeated them in the ears of the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, obey their voice and make them a king. Samuel then said to the men of Israel, go every man to his city. What do you notice about that? What do you like about that? What do you push back at? The people who get to tell the story get to tell it the way they want to tell it, right? I love the line, verse 20. We want to be like all the other nations, you know. And God keeps saying, you don't want a king? It's a big mistake. Big mistake. Samuel says, you don't want a king? Big mistake. Let me tell you how bad it's going to be. And they're like, no, we want one. We want him to go fight our battles for us. We want to be like all the other nations. Which, you know, if you read Judges, God's people had a hard time keeping it together. It's not easy without a king. So they get a king and they get Saul and things get better, sort of. But what do you notice? What do you notice about this passage? What do you like about it? What do you hate about it? What strikes really close to home about it?
I feel like they wanted a king so that they could blame the king for whatever went wrong.
Yeah.
Sort of, the king will be in charge and he'll do this and he'll do that, whether it's bad or good, but he'll be the one that gets blamed.
Yeah, they wanted a king so they could blame him for everything that went wrong. So that he'll be the one that gets blamed. Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Yeah. What else? Have you ever been hired for a job and then discovered they just wanted a fall guy or a fall person, right? Or a hatchet person, right? That's another kind of job. But yeah. Jim?
I think to say they want a king that may judge us.
Yes. I think that it pulls from the judges, from that's the sort of the one to execute the laws over us. I think is a better way to put that. Yeah, to settle our disputes. We want an authority. we like rules, we like authority, we like it. Um, Anarchy just doesn't work very well for very long, right? Yeah, yeah. What else do you notice in this passage? Part of what comes with it, even in the ancient world, we know that part of what comes with having centralized authority are taxes, and we get that. I mean, and it's laid out pretty bare, right? This is what it's going to cost you. And they said, no, 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 we want it. Absolutely, we want it. I wonder how the story got written. I wonder, the story, of course, is not written as it's unfolding. The story is written in retrospective, right? And the Spirit inspires the biblical authors to write it. And those biblical authors are writing after the kingdom has been established. And I wonder if the king said, make sure you put in the bit about 10%. Make sure you put that in, right? Yeah, I don't know. All right, let's look at what happens when taxes go awry in Amos. This is one of the oldest prophets in the Bible, one of the earliest prophets, Amos. And again, I've chosen a different version. I've chosen the Common English Version here for a couple of verses from Amos chapter 5. You people hate judges and honest witnesses. You abuse the poor and demand heavy taxes from them. You have built expensive homes, but you won't enjoy them. You have planted vineyards, but you will get no wine. I am the Lord, and I know your terrible sins. You cheat honest people and take bribes. You rob the poor of justice. Times are so evil that anyone with good sense will keep quiet. So a description and also a judgment there. The bit about you have built expensive homes but won't live in them, planted vineyards but you will get no wine. That's sort of God's reversal of the fortunes of those who have built their wealth upon the backs of others. What I love about it is we often talk about, preachers like me often talk about how the prophets, read any of the prophets, the prophets are primarily concerned with two things. One, bad worship, and two, the ways in which bad worship is a reflection of bad treatment of each other, and in particular, the vulnerable, the poor, the widow, the orphan, the way they treat them. We often talk about that. We talk about how the prophets call us to care for the least among us. But we don't often remember that the way those poor, widows, voiceless ones are being taken advantage of are by institutions of power. These are not roving bands of marauders who come through and steal the loaf of bread from the orphan who only had one. These are judges and lawyers and governors and princes and kings and tax collectors who are squeezing every drop through what seems to be legal means, though not godly means, out of those who can't fight for themselves, right? So when we think about forgetting the needs of the poor, it's not these mysterious cloaked thieves that come and steal the homes of widows. It's the government that says, oh no, I'm sorry, we need your house for this new building project. Good luck finding something else. And there's nobody who will stand up for that person. That's how that happens. It's an implement of the empire, of the authority, and Amos reminds us of that. What do you hear? What do you notice in that passage? Anything else that you would highlight for us?
I think that the way that they're living robs the poor of justice.
Yes, the way that they're living robs the poor of justice. Yeah, yes, and the whole life, the whole community. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, Cliff.
I think we should hit verse 12 against 13, because the Lord is saying, I know your terrible sins. He's for all practical purposes chastising. And in the bottom line, it says, those with good sense will keep quiet. Maybe there is a cynicism or irony that we should not keep quiet.
Oh yeah, it's yeah.
Get forward.
Yeah, yes, exactly. And the condemnation of the society is so great that the prophet notes that even those who would say otherwise, they dare not open their mouth because they'll be run out of town. Right? Yeah. Yes, yeah, exactly. Yes, absolutely. You know, it's the person in the eighth grade group that says, that's cheating. We can't do that. And all the friends say, shut up. We right. Who gonna tell, right? Anyway, you're either going to take the wrath of your colleagues or the wrath of the teacher, one or the other, right? Which is going to be, right? And one's closer than the other. Yeah. But that the Bible, when you start to look at it, the Bible has a lot to say about taxes and what taxes are for and what taxes aren't for. And when the people like the king in First Samuel and like the authorities that we hear about in Amos, when the person who's imposing the taxes doesn't have the welfare of the people in mind, then the consolidation of power equals the consolidation of financial resources. That shouldn't surprise us. That doesn't surprise us, right? All right, well, let's read what the New Testament has to say. Let's see what time it is. Let's read what Mark has to say. We know this text. Mark chapter 12, the authorities sent to Jesus some of the Pharisees and some of the Herodians to trap him in his talk. And they came and said to him, Teacher, we know that you are true and don't care about anyone's opinion, for you are not swayed by appearances, but truly teach the way of God. Is it lawful to pay taxes to Caesar or not? Should we pay them or should we not? But knowing their hypocrisy, he said to them, Why put me to the test? Bring me a denarius and let me look at it. And they brought one. And he said to them, whose likeness and inscription is this? And they said to him, Caesar's. Jesus said to them, Render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's, and to God the things that are God's. And they marveled at him. There are so many ways to hear and interpret this passage, right? One way is to interpret it ironically, right? To say the coin itself is a sin. You can't have a graven image, right? If you're a faithful Jewish person. But of course, you have to have the denarius. You can't make it through life without one. And so the irony is that those who are complaining about religious allegiance are the ones who have the coin in their pocket. So maybe, that's the point. Another way to interpret this is that Jesus is saying, well, you shouldn't pay the taxes. That Caesar gets what Caesar's, and we get we give to God what God's. Jesus, a lot of his language is reminiscent of the Essene community, Dead Sea Scroll community, kind of a separatist group, an off-the-grid group, a group sounds like not unlike those who were arrested in Massachusetts overnight. Did you read about that? The 11 armed individuals who sort of are using language about their own sovereignty, right? These kind of separatist groups. A lot of what Jesus has to say sounds a lot like what that kind of separatist group. They didn't go to the temple and they didn't do anything. They lived off the grid. So they didn't have to do these things. And so maybe what Jesus is saying is, if you've got Caesar's money, give it to Caesar. But I'm off the grid. I'm not doing that. But another way to read this is to say, actually, you have to figure out that your spiritual allegiance and your economic allegiance are sometimes in conflict with each other. And what does it mean to be faithful in both realms? And that's where I find it helpful. I don't find it really helpful, regardless of what Jesus intended, to go live off the grid. And I don't find it all that helpful to sort of thumb my nose at religious opponents. I want to know sort of how do we figure this out? And it's tricky. It's a nice, neat, tidy answer, but the practically speaking, how do you do that? How do you give to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's? Is it nothing belongs to Caesar because it all belongs to God, or does God give some of it to Caesar? I mean, anyway, so how do you make sense of this? You've heard this passage probably your whole life long. How have you heard and made sense of this passage as it applies to your own economic and political life? Is it just an aphorism that doesn't have any bearing on our real lives? Or is it something that actually shapes the way we live? When you are writing that check to the IRS, or when you're having your personal property assessed in the state of Arkansas, do you sit there and think, render to Caesar the things that are Caesar's and to God the things that are God's? Do you think about that? Or is it so removed from that hold on? How do you make sense of this? Thoughts?
I think my greed enters into the life.
Yeah, yeah,
Having to make this decision.
yeah. Our greed enters into it. Yeah, thank you.
And I know where I think.
Yes, yes,
I'm given a picture.
yes, yes. Yeah, 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 thank you. Yeah, other thoughts. Dave, and then I'll come across the way.
I usually thought about it as the separation of church and state, because these are just two separate things that are not associated to each other. More recently, I think it's probably not what it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
But that is how I've always felt.
It's easy to think about this. Yep, separation of church and state. It's in the Bible, right? Yes, but maybe not. And I hear you acknowledging, maybe I've made too much of that. Then, yeah. Linda, did you have something? No. Other thoughts? Yeah. I think it's tricky. I think it's supposed to be tricky. I think it's a great text that allows us to preach it in many ways. Yeah. Let's hold on to that, and we won't read the whole of the next passage, but let me highlight for you. Oh yeah, Pam.
Why is it that we all see taxes as so negative when in fact we all enjoy
Yeah.
the things that our tax money pulls together supplies?
Yeah. Why?
Is it just that's just part of our culture? We grouse about taxes,
Yeah.
but nobody grouses about the fire truck coming and their house is burning?
Yeah. So Pam asked the question, why do we all hate taxes? Is it a part of our culture? You know, when the fire truck comes, we're grateful for it, but we don't like to pay it. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm gonna respond to that in a minute, but let me go to Jeffrey.
Some people consider what are you paying taxes for?
Yeah.
During the 60s, there was a goodly amount of the population who refused to contribute in their taxes what would have been going to the Vietnam War because they felt that they were paying for something that they found abhorrent.
Yes. Yeah, so what are we paying for and who gets to decide that? And I think to your point and Pam's point, who's the best person to decide that? Right? Local. Right? You know, we tend to vote for mills on local school efforts, taxes on local schools, but we tend to complain about national taxes, right? Which is why, the legislative process, people used to, we celebrate. It's not quite as simple as it used to be. We used to celebrate those preferential projects that come our way because we've got a well-established senator or representative, right, in Congress who wins for us these projects, right? Yes. Who decides? I wonder, part of our national story is the Boston Tea Party, right? It's rejection of paying taxes to a faraway government. And that language continues to fuel our national identity on days like July the 4th, right? I lived right outside of Washington, D.C. for a short while, and don't you love the license plate, right? The Washington, D.C. license plate says taxation without representation, because they don't have voting members of Congress there, right? So it's still a part of our national myth. It's a part of who we are, yes, and it gets used, that language, that story, that sense of patriotism gets weaponized. Absolutely. Yes. All right, let's skip the Romans passage. Romans says, pay your taxes. And let's look at the end. And I only have a few words from this document. It's about a 25-page document. If you want to read it, I'll give it to you. It's from 2009. But Christian Aid is an organization in England, a charity that spans a lot of Christian denominations and churches. And they wrote a report about taxation. And this is just a little bit of it. And I want to read it and just kind of throw that out at us. The avoidance of tax, just as much as the illegal evasion of tax, constitutes a wrong or broken relationship between people and state, as does the failure of a state to collect the tax that it is owed. The fact that probably the majority of individual and corporate taxpayers do not see tax avoidance in these terms is an instance of structural sin. So, and they say it plainly like that, and of course there's more to unpack, but essentially, efforts we take to not pay our fair share are sinful. It reflects the brokenness of our relationship with the state, and I don't just mean the governor and the state legislature or the national government, I mean the community, and our unwillingness to associate tax avoidance with failing to honor those relationships is a reflection of sin. That's a bold statement. In a place like America, where we hate taxes, right? It's a bold statement to say, those of you who try not to pay your taxes through legal or questionably legal means, that practice is sinful, fundamentally sinful. I'm not telling you that's my opinion. I'm not telling you it's not my opinion. I'm curious what you think. I've put it out there because, it kind of begins to weave the threads that we've seen about from the Exodus story and from the Second Chronicles story, from the establishment of a king in 1 Samuel, and the bits that we get about render to Caesar and to a God, and even what we see in Romans. It starts to weave them together into a tapestry that, I've never thought about it that way. What do you think about that? How do you make sense of that approach to taxes? As a good Christian, should we all pay our taxes and love it, or something else? What do you think about that? What do you think about that? You're right. I mean, we're all.
The same dilemma as voting rights.
The same dilemma as voting rights. Say more about that.
If you're on my side, we'll set up the voting the way I see it.
Depends on what side you're on. Yeah.
And we'll all love it.
Yeah. Yeah. Depends on what side you're on. Yeah. You've seen that. How much of our lives depend upon the financial contributions of others, not just when the fire truck comes, right? But the roads we drive on, the way agriculture works in this country. Think of all think of all the ways that the taxes support everything and how easy it is to kind of miss that. And that when I'm trying to not pay taxes, am I not saying I shouldn't have to contribute to our common life? I'm expecting other people to do it. How would, as a religious belief, as a theological statement, how would that approach to taxation change not only the way we talk about taxes, but the way we talk about our common life, the way we talk about the nature of our taxes, regressive versus progressive taxes? How would that, just think about that. I'm not asking for an answer, but just think about that. We're out of time. If you want to read that, let me know. You send me an email. Don't tell me today because I'll forget. But if you send me an email, I'll be happy to forward you that document so that you can read it. I sent it to my father late last night and said, "Hey, read this. It's pretty interesting." And economically and theologically, it raises some really interesting issues about taxation that just strike at the core of who I am and who I've always been, which is what I love. I want to think about these things that I've taken for granted my whole life long. Well, I'm glad you've been with us. Thank you. Let's pray together the prayer that Jesus has taught us. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank y'all.